This week on Quadriga, War on Terror, How to Combat Islamic State. French President Francois Hollande is on a diplomatic mission. He's looking for allies in a war against the IS terrorist organization. It's to be a new alliance involving the US, Germany, Russia, and Britain with airstrikes against IS strongholds. But is that enough? Calls for Western ground troops are growing louder. Their deployment would be dangerous with an uncertain outcome. So what is the best way to combat IS? Coming to you from Berlin, Quadriga, the international debate. Your host today, Peter Craven.
Yes, hello and a very warm welcome indeed to this latest edition of Quadriga, coming to you from the heart of the German capital, Berlin. Now, the shocking terrorist attacks in Turkey, in Lebanon, Paris and Tunisia that we've recently seen, as well as the downing of a Russian passenger plane over Egypt, have all been either claimed by or blamed on Islamic State. And that's the reason why today we're asking the question, War on Terror, How to Combat IS. And to do so, I'm joined here in the studio by three excellent analysts and commentators. Let me introduce them to you, beginning with Ulrike Herrmann, who is an author and journalist with the Berlin-based daily The Tageszeitung, or TATS as it's also known. She says to fight a war, you need money, and that's why we need to cut off the cash flow to Islamic State. Also with us today is Alan Posener. He's a commentator for the daily newspaper Die Welt. He's convinced that destroying IS is easy. I repeat, destroying IS is easy and necessary. The hard part, he says, comes later, and that is building a new Syria. Also with us is Daniel Gerlach, the founder and editor of Zenith. That's a German magazine focusing on politics, economics and culture in the Middle East. He believes if the West doesn't come up with an honest plan for the future of the territory held by IS, nobody can expect to find allies on the ground. Thank you all for being here. I have to begin with Alan Posener. Yeah, you look surprised, Alan, but you say destroying Islamic State is easy. I am surprised by that comment. Would you be willing to make that comment to the victims of the attacks that I've just listed? Because surely they would throw it back in your face and say, if it's easy, why wasn't it done before my brother, my sister, my father, my mother was killed?
Yeah, well, they shouldn't throw it back in my face. They should throw it back in the face of Barack Obama, basically, who failed to lead the West in the fight against IS, and all the European leaders. I mean, Mr. Francois Hollande, who is now touring capitals, he at least can say that French planes have been bombing IS, but he's been let down totally by Mr. Cameron, who didn't get a vote through Parliament, and he's been let down totally by his German so-called allies. And what I'm saying is, Obama officially stated one day, I think, before the Paris attacks that the idea was to contain Islamic State, as if you could contain a terrorist organization which is at the same time a state. Now, it's this thinking that we should contain Islamic State which led directly to the Paris attacks. Therefore, yes, have them throw back this question in the face of Western leaders, in the face of those who fail to act. I've been rooting for attacks against IS as long as I can remember.
What do you say, Ulrike Herrmann? I mean, my feeling, I must say, you know, having followed this story for a long time and, you know, been reading around it acutely, is that we don't have the faintest idea how to deal with the problem of Islamic State. Now, not that it's easy. What do you say?
Well, I would not agree that it would be easy to fight the IS, because, you know, it's not just bombing from the air that you need. You also need troops on the ground. And that's the problem, because, of course, after Afghanistan and after the disaster in Iraq, there aren't any Western states anymore that would want to have a third war on the ground. So, and that's why the IS is indeed successful, because there is no one fighting against them. The only ones who do that are the Kurds. And they are not really well equipped, because Turkey is afraid of strengthening the Kurds. So, in fact, there is a vacuum, and that's being used by the IS.
Totally agree.
Well, I have to object. You know, the Kurds are not the only ones who are fighting the Islamic State, the so-called Islamic State, but that's probably not the issue. What I think we should keep in mind is that the IS is not such an isolated problem as you presented it, Alan, because you said it's easy to defeat them. I agree. In military terms, it's easy to defeat what you called Islamic State, and you emphasized, both of you, I think, agreed that it's a state. I disagree with that, but that's not the issue. In military terms, to defeat the militias in Syria and Iraq is possible. It's not easy, but it's possible, and it should have been done long ago. But it's not such an isolated problem. We have Islamic, so-called Islamic State cells in Africa, in Libya, even in Afghanistan. So I think, we have to see this as more of a global problem, and we are not only dealing with a structure, we're dealing with an ideology, and we're dealing with, and we come to that probably later, with, root problems which are very much similar to each other, which is the collapse of the real states. And in an environment where states collapse and where states have no positive function at all, everybody can come up and say, I have a state, I have a caliphate. And that's why I think we should be very careful with branding the Islamic State as a state. That's not at all accurate, in my view.
Yeah, well, totally agree that it's a huge problem. It's a global problem. It's a problem which isn't only the problem of one small area in Syria and Iraq. It goes down to Boko Haram in Nigeria and so on and so on. And this has to be done one after the other. It's no use expanding the problem. You have to break down the problem to its component parts. And one part is IS, Daesh. And why is it important to defeat them there? Because when every village and town they take, they write a slogan on the walls. Daesh is here and Daesh is growing. And this is their ideology. We're not like Al-Qaeda, terror attacks now and somewhere in the vague future there's going to be this Islamic State. No, Islamic State, caliphate is here and now. And we have to stop that. We have to reduce them first to little terrorist cells, and then let's talk about that later. First, do the necessary thing.
The one thing you two agree on is that this is a global problem. It demands a global solution. Our political leaders are talking about a global alliance. Who could be in that alliance?
Are you asking me?
Go on, you start.
Well, firstly, there is a global alliance. Over 24 people, 24 countries under the leadership of the United States, or unfortunately weak leadership, but they're already there. And obviously, Russia will have to join, although they haven't proved...
You don't sound very convinced, Alan. Russia will have to join.
Well, look, Russia's strategy was to support Assad and to support Iran and to confront the Sunnis and they helped create this problem of IS, as Assad did, as Iran did. So Russia was on the wrong side from the start. Now that they've been attacked with their airline, as you said in the introduction, now that they see that their own Sunni minorities in the Caucasus are looking to Islamic State, I think it's time they made a decision. But it's up to them. If they go on doing things like provoking Turkey, another Sunni state in the area, as they have done with their bomber, which got shot down, thank goodness, if they go on doing that, then they're part of the problem, not part of the solution. It's their decision.
Ulrike, is a global alliance the solution to the problem, or is it a problem in itself, possibly?
Well, a global alliance would be fine, but there isn't any global alliance. I mean, just as Alan Posener mentioned, the Russians have different interests from the West. And it's not only a question about the West and Russia. I think you should not ignore the immense importance that the regional powers around Syria have. So those who really decide on what's happening in Syria are Turkey, are Iran and Saudi Arabia. And unfortunately, those three have opposite interests. And it's very difficult to see how they will agree on some solution for Syria.
But do they really have different interests when it comes to the Islamic State? That's what we read and write and say all the time. Everybody wants to fight the Islamic State. Everybody's happy to have a common enemy. Maybe we can find some common ground, put everybody at the round table. But do these opposing powers in the Middle East really have a different interest when it comes to the Islamic State? I don't know. In my perception, this Islamic State is not only a potential danger or an imminent danger, but also beneficiary to certain powers in the Middle East. And what's Turkey's interest in destroying the Islamic State? What is Iran's interest in destroying the Islamic State? And what is Saudi Arabia's interest to destroy the Islamic State? The Islamic State, and that's the reason, by the way, why they haven't been attacked by the Russians as a priority, is not even threatening the Assad regime. It is there. It is at the moment not really expanding. It's trying to consolidate. And it's certainly not threatening Turkey. It's not threatening Iran, at least not directly. And it's, after all, not threatening Saudi Arabia if we leave aside the ideological competition. And the fact that in Saudi Arabia we have a lot of aficionados to the IS. But to be honest, break it down and see like who would really be ready to throw in his lot and to take a great effort to combat the Islamic State if it's either not on the priority list or can even be beneficial.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, I know that you have an awful lot of contacts in the region. Your people on the ground in the region. What do they want from the West? What are they hoping for?
You know, it really depends who you're talking to, of course, as always. But I can tell you that I know people whose family are being ruled by, let's say, this militia calling itself the Islamic State. They are saying, and this is by the way, a very affordable plan. Why doesn't the West come up with a plan? What's going to be the political future of the land that we live on? If the alternative to being ruled by the Islamic State is to be, allocated again back to the Assad regime or to any other sectarian regime in the region, then thank you very much. We're not going to rise against these people. Okay, Islamic State has understood at a very early stage who they have to kill and who they have to eliminate. These are not necessarily minorities or groups of different tradition or belief. These were social posts, people, big clans, family leaders that can think independently and that can rally around people that could probably rise up against the Islamic State. You can buy these people, and that's what the Islamic State understood about this mentality, and they wanted to make sure that these people no longer exist. But tell the people in the region openly, how do we see the political future of that? And that doesn't only account for Syria, but also for Libya and other countries.
But then we are back to question one. There is no political solution for the whole of Syria, because the regional powers, Iran, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, have very different interests.
But have we thought one through? I have never seen a government declare, this is how we see the future of Syria. In 5 years, I have never seen a head of state coming up saying, this is the plan. Okay, people would say, these are neo-colonialist attitudes, they want to redraw the map in the Middle East.
They just met in Vienna. They all met in Vienna and came up with no solution at all. And that shows when everyone sits in Vienna in a hotel for 2 days and they don't come up with a solution, you can be sure there isn't any solution at the moment that all can agree on.
Because this is a fascinating... We're going to come back to the solution. What happens if Islamic State is defeated? We'll be talking about that in just a second. Let's just first of all look at the options that any possible alliance that may or may not come together, the options that they have for defeating Islamic State. Let's look at that first.
Islamic State is attracting would-be jihadists from around the world. IS terror is dominating the media and causing widespread anxiety. Over the past few years, IS has been able to expand its control in Iraq and Syria virtually unhindered. The consensus among terror experts and politicians is that alongside military strikes, Islamic State's sources of funding must be dried up. They include sales of oil as well as clandestine donations coming from the Gulf states. Also, the terrorist supply routes through Turkey need to be blocked. The Kurdish Peshmerga and moderate Syrian rebels waging war against the militants need both military and political support. The West will only be able to defeat IS in cooperation with the Muslim world.
The one thing we've agreed on, I think, so far in this discussion is that there are lots of ways of combating Islamic State. We don't know whether they will effectively work or not. We don't know that. But what we've been talking about is that any alliance that is going to come together needs to have clear goals for the future. What could those goals be?
Well, we have a model, actually, and that is our intervention in the Balkans, and specifically Bosnia-Herzegovina. What we did there was, nominally, we saved Bosnia as a unitary state, but de facto, I was there this summer, there are two states. There's Republika Srpska, which is the Christian Serbian half of the state, and there's BiH, the Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is basically Muslim, and there are some Croatian enclaves. So they are self-governing in all but name two states. We need to offer the Sunni, I agree with you totally, we need to offer the Sunni in Syria their own autonomous region and guarantees that they will not be attacked by the then government in Damascus, the Alawite government, which can stay in power, nominally ruling the place, whoever is at the head, Assad or a member of his clan or whatever. So we need guarantees for the Sunnis so that they will be willing and able to fight on our side.
Daniel?
No.
Good.
Sorry. The Sunnis are the vast majority of Syria. And the Sunnis don't need guarantees. And I don't want to be mistaken, you know, I don't want us to mistake the Islamic State for the representation of the Sunnis of Syria. And I don't want to say that, you know, Sunnis are fighting against Assad, whereas the Alawites are fighting for Assad. This is not an Alawite regime. I don't want to go too much into details about, you know, sectarianism in the region. This is a regime, and I could tell you, you know, name by name, composed of different religious groups that are bound together by, like a gang, let's say, like a criminal gang. Everybody is kind of got something to blackmail the other. It's not about, the government itself is not about sectarianism, but we have to come up with guarantees not only for the Sunnis of Syria, but for all the groups, in particular for the minorities, the Alawites, the Christians, the Ismailis. And when we look at the future of Syria, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to split it up along sectarian lines. That would be, you know, dealing with it in a wrong way. But we have to think it through. Take out the maps. Call in the Syrians and say, how do you see, I don't want to use the word autonomy, probably self-administration for the moment. How do you see, how can you best serve your own interest in your province, on your, you know, local level, to make sure that the bloodshed stops, that you can start dealing with your neighbors again? Let's just think it through, but we haven't even come to that level yet.
That is the Bosnian solution.
The Balkanization is...
It's a Bosnian solution, not Balkan. Yeah. It's a Bosnian solution. Give everyone their own self-governing areas. Look, in Bosnia, I mean, these people were killing each other 10 years ago.
But it's not a Bosnian solution, because in Bosnia you had three groups.
And now you can travel from one part to the other, and there's no murders, no revenge killings, nothing. The place is at peace.
But you have in Bosnia you had three different groups. In Syria you have multiple groups, and you have, by the way, a lot of secular Sunnis, or Sunnis that are allied to the Assad regime. You have Sunnis that are very proud of serving the Assad regime.
You have secular Bosnians, of course, and you have people in the Serbian regions who didn't approve of what they were doing. I totally agree.
It can be inspired by the Balkan model, but it shouldn't be, you know, we shouldn't just like copy-paste the Balkan model, and we shouldn't be, you know, the expectations that we have from this Balkan solution is probably, you know, should be mitigated.
OK, that's looking into the future. Ulrike, what about at the present? How do we get there? In Germany, there's been a tendency for a sort of a streak of pacifism in Germany almost, that military might cannot be used to solve political problems. Can it and should it be used in this instance, and should Germany join the fight?
No, it should not. I mean, I'm not against waging a war if there is the possibility of success, but or if there is necessity and the possibility of success. But in Syria, there is no possibility of success, because I think that this analogy to Bosnia is completely misleading. Because in Bosnia, there was just Bosnia fighting, and it was an internal conflict that you could solve by somehow helping them from the outside. But in Syria, it's completely different. You have the Syrians fighting against each other. But apart from that, I can just repeat myself. You have Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. And they are at odds ends. Saudi Arabia does not want to have a government run by Shiites. Iran, of course, wants to keep Assad because it was an ally. The Turkish are afraid that the Kurds might be too strong. And and those three powers are now fighting for supremacy. And first thing you have to do is to somehow reconcile these three powers. And then perhaps you can start talking about Syria, how it should be internally organized. But to start organizing Syria internally without having these three powers on board is just, you know, without any chance of success. And so as long as these three powers fight in Syria, it would be just plain crazy for Germany to intervene and in the end fight against Iran or something like that.
Well look, just a couple of minutes ago, I think we were all saying we need a model for what's going to happen at the end. Now, we've sort of agreed some kind of canton model where people have self-determination without destroying the state.
Which can be temporary.
Right, which can be temporary. And that is actually what was agreed in Vienna. And now we've agreed on that. Organize a coalition. And don't just say it's impossible. Actually, in Vienna, we got quite far.
No, we
Build
didn't.
on that. Yes, we did. There's a general agreement that we have to, that in January, negotiations will start. Now, let's build on that instead of saying, oh, that's nothing, that's nothing, that's nothing. It's a totally non-constructive attitude.
Talking about, you were saying that this is easy, that it's a job that can be done. We talked at the beginning about the role of the Kurds and the importance of ground fighting. Who's going to do the ground fighting apart from the Kurds?
Well, I think, for instance, creating a no-fly zone in the north and giving Turkey more responsibility, that would help a lot. Then things like this Russian incident wouldn't have happened. I think the Jordanians have an excellent army. I think we need to lean on the Gulf states to actually put their boots where their mouths are and their money is. And we need to equip and control Iraqi forces who are driving back the... and make sure that it's not used for Shia retaliation in Iraq. So on all fronts, I still think we need Western boots on the ground, but quite frankly, as long as Obama's in power, we're not going to get Americans. As long as the Americans don't go, the French and the British and the Germans aren't going to go anywhere. So that's theoretical. Maybe next year.
I am very reluctant when it... in principle, I agree that one should build on what's on the table, even if we don't like it probably in details. But I'd be very reluctant to involve Turkey in this whole project. And without Turkey, how can you do this?
Exactly.
Because, yeah, but the point is here, what the Russians are doing at the moment is in concordance, let's say, with the Assad regime. They want to prevent Turkey to establish, let's say, a buffer zone, which would not only be a buffer zone, but which would be a zone of Turkish influence, which would regain a border with the so-called Islamic State. And I know that the minorities in Syria are very much talking about, allying with the Kurds and trying to create their own buffer zone along the north to cut the supply route of the Islamic State in Turkey. So now, to involve Turkey as one of the leading military powers in Syria, I don't think it's a good idea. And the Turks are just like filled up to here with their own problems at the moment. If we don't pay attention to the situation in Turkey, and if we don't look after the to stabilization of Turkey under this Erdogan government, the city of Diyarbakir, the Kurdish city of Diyarbakir, if we're not careful, might look like Aleppo in a couple of years. I know it's a strong thing to say, but we should be very careful about the stability of Turkey. And when we talk about refugees, I think Turkey, if we don't, and if the Turks don't, and if they don't see the red flag, might produce refugees in large numbers that are not coming from Syria, but they are fleeing out of Turkey to Europe. Because the situation in Turkey with the Kurds, the upcoming civil war, is very, very dangerous. So I think Turkey it cannot work at the moment as a NATO ally or a stabilizing power in the region. I wish all the luck possible in this world to the Turks, that they keep their country together. But I think this Erdogan government is playing, and not only the Erdogan government, is playing a very, very dangerous game to its own people at the moment. So can we rely on Turkey, or should the French just work with the Kurds and continue bombing the Islamic State and get the Saudis or Gulf states on board? I don't know.
I sense Ulrike has an answer.
No, I'm happy that finally everyone agrees with me that there is no sense in looking for a Syrian solution as long as you have not solved the problems in the regional powers. But what I really found very interesting is this idea to somehow have non-flying zones in Syria, because how is that supposed to work? That would be the entrance into a war for the Western countries. Because if you wanted to have a no-flying zone against the wishes of Assad, then of course you would have to send fighters there, and then Assad could just down them with.
I doubt it.
With his missiles.
I doubt it. Let him try. Bring him on, as George Bush said. I'd love that.
Assad is really technically very well equipped, much better than, let's say, Libya. So that would be really dangerous to somehow enforce a non-flying zone on Assad without him wanting to.
Well, look, the Turks have just shown how you do that. And I must say, the downing of the Russian aircraft was probably the best news we've had out of Syria for the past months. And I think it's really dangerous. I don't know who's behind Zenith, if it's the Kurds. I think it's really dangerous to denigrate Turkey as if Turkey was somehow some country in the third world. It is still a democratic state. It is still a member of NATO, an indispensable ally in the region, the only ally we have in the region if you disregard Israel. And the one people we have to strengthen if anything is going to be achieved there.
OK, we're running out of time. We've got one more minute. The question we initially had was how to combat IS. Can IS be combated within the year, let's say? Within the coming year?
Within the coming year, OK.
Yeah.
I think 2015 is going to be difficult. 2016 is going to be...
It could happen.
It's going to be possible,
It's possible.
No, I think it's not possible to combat IS in Syria, but it would be possible to combat the terror here in Europe.
Alan, I don't know what... I've
won't
got
be talking
a
about IS.
different question. Are we going to see President Putin and President Obama on an aircraft carrier somewhere in the Mediterranean with mission accomplished written behind them? Yes or no?
Yes, and Angela Merkel is going to be with them. So, and that's going to win her the election in 2017.
OK, we've got to leave you now. Bye-bye from Quadriga.